Hello and welcome back to the Blender Basics video series. These videos are designed to accompany the chapters found in the Blender Basics book, so in case you don't have the book, move on over to www.cdschools.org/blenderbasics to download a copy. This video will focus on Chapter 8, Render Settings. This is going to be a pretty short chapter, but it's a very important one. When you first launch Blender, it probably won't be set to the defaults that you would like to work with. So for this scene, we'll get started with I have the lighthouse scene back up, which is what we've been working on through the entire book. So let's move on over to the render buttons. So our render properties menu, which would be the first camera little button here that you see on the side. So when you render, you can render an image, which is the same thing we've been doing up to now by hitting F12 on your keyboard renders a picture. And you'll see your scene as it comes up here. So we'll hit escape to get out of that a while. When you hit animation, you'll actually animate out a movie, which we're not quite ready to do yet, and even an audio. So what do we want to look at in these settings, in this big panel here? And I'm going to minimize this 3D view I have up here at the top so we can see a little bit more of what's going on with our buttons, because this is our focus on this unit. So setting up your scene, we normally render at HD 720p. That's what we render at, our HD setting of the lower one. So we have to set our X and Y resolution. And the easiest way to set that would be to go to render presets. So you'll see whichever, wherever you're at, what you want to work with. We used to go with TV NTSC 4:3 proportion, which would be considered DVD quality, but we're now doing HD TV 720p. We're finding that with our nicer machines now, we can render at that size pretty well. So we'll click that, HD TV 720p. That now gave us a 1280 by 720 render. Now when I hit F12, do I want to render at 100% of that or a percentage of it? If you're just doing some quick checks with your renders to see how your scene looks, maybe you might want to take the percentage down. But when you're ready for final quality, make sure that's at 100%. Your frame rate from starting at frame 1, ending at frame 250, which is also set down here at the bottom of your screen. And frames per second. So we actually want to go with 30 frames a second or 29.97. Either one's going to work pretty good. We don't have to mess with aspect ratio. Everything looks good since we're doing HD TV quality. Time remapping is something that I want to mention right now. If you make a movie and you find out it's running too slow or too fast, and you want to think, gee, I'd like to remap my time, but I don't want to reanimate anything, this is where you want to go. So if you keep your old remapping at 100%, but let's say you wanted to run twice as fast, change this end frame here. So you can change it from 100% to say 50% or 200%, depending on how you're going to want to your final video to run. So you can be the master of time here. So you can become a time lord using this one. Okay, let's keep going down the list here. Aliasing is something you probably don't really want to mess with. 8 is usually normally pretty good, and it just basically renders your image a little higher quality. You can go all the way up to 16, but 8 usually works very well. I don't usually see much of a difference with it. Sample motion blur. If you've ever noticed the animation of, say, a propeller spinning on an airplane, what this would allow you to do is actually blur part of your image that's in fast motion when you're making a movie. So if you enable this, basically what the Blender will do, it'll look at the current frame that it's rendering, it'll look at the frame after it and the frame before it, and put a little bit of a blur on your object. So it could be something you might want to play around with when you're doing an animation that has some fast motion to it. The shading panel is just basically telling Blender what all should I work with, and really this works out pretty well. If you're going to render images that have transparent backgrounds, you will need to set the alpha from sky to transparent. So just remember that if you're going to render an image that you're going to overlay on something else and you want to be able to see through the pixels where there's nothing drawn, that's something you might want to work with there too. So just remember where that's at. Performance, again, is something we don't normally have to mess with either in here, but it's here for some options in here. Post-processing, if you have something in your video sequence editor, it's automatically going to override whatever's going on in this scene if this box is checked. So you may want to turn off sequence post-processing if you have something in your video sequence editor, which we really haven't talked about much yet. Metadata is just some basically, do you want to timestamp your video and put some data on it. We don't usually mess with that either. Your output is where we need to spend the most time right now. So far the only thing we've changed is doing HD 720 pixel, HD TV 720p, setting our frame rate, and now we're down here to output. So since we want to render eventually a movie, by default it's set up to a PNG image, but if I wanted to render a movie eventually, I'd probably want to set this one to MPEG. We typically do MPEG 4 movies these days. So I set that output to do an MPEG, and then you'll see that an encoding panel opens up below that. So underneath encoding, what we probably want to do is MPEG 4 if we're doing an MPEG 4 movie, and the codec also to MPEG 4. Now you'll notice you have a lot of different options in here. You could do a QuickTime movie and AVI file, but MPEG 4 is about the most common these days that we work with. And the only other thing I would mess with in here is if you're going to have audio eventually to your video, you might want to set this one to like an AAC, AAC3, or where you typically just set it to MP3 and it works out pretty well. Alright, so we set our size, we set up MPEG, we told it that it's an MPEG 4 movie, and if it has audio codec we're using MP3. The very last thing we want to do is set our output file to where this movie is going to be saved when we're done. Now if we're just rendering a single image, we don't have to worry about this. But if we're doing a movie, we would have to say where it's going to go, and we would have to type in the movie name and put the extension on it, .mp4. If you don't type in the movie name, .mp4, it won't have an extension. It won't know what to do with it if you don't have MP4 on the end of it. Now I'm going to cancel out of that right now because I'm not really saving a movie right now, but I just wanted to at least let you know that, you know, this is where you would save it. And even though we're telling it we want to do an MPEG movie, it's still very easy for us to render a PNG image file, which is actually what we're supposed to do with the lighthouse scene in Chapter 8. So basically, you would just set up everything the way you want to. You hit F12, render your picture, and it's now rendering a 1280 by 720 pixel image. And I can still zoom in and out here if I want to. When the image is rendered, hit F3 on your keyboard. So we did an F12 to render, we did an F3 to save a rendered PNG image file. So what you would have to do is go in here, change the name of it, and I'll just call it Lighthouse. Keep the .png on the end of it, that way Blender knows you're saving a PNG image file. And either hit enter twice. The first time you hit enter sets the title, the second time you hit enter is the same as hitting the save as button. And right now it is now saving that image. And if I actually went out to that folder, so I'm going to go out here to a file browser real quick, and I'll go into my Blender Basics 5 folder in here. And let's see, we're in the Lighthouse folder, I believe. Or where was I saving this? Nope, it's just in the Blender Basics 5 folder, and let's see, Lighthouse. Right there's the picture. Okay, so we just saved an image of the lighthouse. So there you go, all the render settings you need to work with, and also be able to save and render a picture. Thanks for watching.